look at trying to build an ID card using some of the assets and creating our own assets in Adobe Photoshop. Now, one of the first things we had to look at was de-edging or cutting out an image, and I supplied you guys with some fairly high-res photographs of people with nice clean backgrounds. Here's one here, and the best way to actually de-edge an image is to make sure you have high res and that you open that with Photoshop directly. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this image here that I've downloaded. It is in Adobe Photoshop 2020, and I'm just going to do a quick cleanup of my workspace. As you can see, it's pretty messy at the moment. So I'm going to go Window, Workspace, and I'm just going to go Essentials for this one and reset. If there's anything you don't need on here, like properties or anything like that at the moment, do turn them off. Window, Properties, for example. I'm going to keep my colors. I'm going to keep my Layers panel over here on the right. Alright, so a quick recap on de-edging. There's a bunch of resources out for this, so I'm going to show you a real quick example of that. First of all, just by duplicating that background layer and turning the background one off. And the simple reason for that is if we do go through and do anything weird like erasing, if the background is on because it's identical, you will not see that. So make sure you do turn that, and you'll notice here on the left I've got my little command panel, so you'll actually be able to see what it is that I'm doing as I go through the steps. So Command Z to try and step backwards. Alright, there we go. Background turned off. Now in mask mode, we can actually edit this in mask mode directly. What I typically like to do is go through and use our selection tools to try and select our object. I'm going to do a really quick one for this. I'm going to go W, Object Selection Tool, like that. And if we have a look over here, we have an option without the pop-ups jumping over, select subject. Let's give that a go. Sample layers unticked, but we've only got a sample. Let's see how this works. Give it a few moments just to see how it goes, and once again, depending on the resolution. Alright, not great. We've got a few weird assets popping out over here. So what I might do is deselect that. I'm going to go Command or Control D to deselect. You can also go Select, deselect from the menu, and let's switch this over to something like the rectangle tool, or you can try the lasso tool as well. And all we're going to do is drag over the area that we want to select, give it a few moments, and that looks a little bit better. I'm going to hold that shift key to move down, the space bar to move down, and then shift to add to selection. Remember, shift to add, alt to subtract. If there's any additional areas that we want to get, obviously shift will bring up the plus, alt to bring up the negative, but this looks pretty good. There's a little bit of color there. We can try grabbing that. If all else fails, jump into your lasso tool, alpha lasso, and again shift to add, alt to subtract. Can't stress that enough. Alright, once we've got that selected, I'm going to hit the mask key. Button is here at the lower part of the layer panel. Other option is you can actually right click in here and go select and mask. So there's a bunch of different ways in Photoshop. I'm so used to pushing this button, it's pretty much right there. Alright, and what we're going to see is our layer and our mask. Our mask is in grayscales. Anything black is completely invisible, like our background. Anything white is visible. Now what I really like to do is create a color drop background for this. So there's a couple of ways of doing this, but I'm just going to do it the old-fashioned way. I'm just going to click to create a new layer. I'm going to go over to my paint bucket tool, G for paint bucket. Make sure it's on the paint bucket tool, not the gradient tool. You can hit Shift G to cycle through these, and I'm going to pick a high contrasting color like red and drop that in there. Now because I've been playing around with this before, I've just noticed it looks a bit weird. It's because my opacity is a bit low. I'm going to undo that. Opacity 100%, and I'm also going to make sure it's unticked from all layers. I don't want the visible layers affecting this. And solid red. I'm going to drag that below my other layer, and this is going to really highlight the areas that need fixing up. Alright, so back to our mask. Now please pay attention that the layer and the mask are separate entities, so you can select one or the other. I'm going to open up the mask mode. Now if you're lucky, you can just double click on the mask, it will open. If not, right click on there, and let's go select and mask and click on that. This is going to open us in our mask mode, and we've got our zoom options and all the rest, command plus, command minus. And over here on the left, we've got a bunch of tools. So we actually do have things like the quick selection tool. So if you did want to start selecting stuff there, remember, use your square brackets to help increase or decrease your brush size. Or if you want to remove an area, Alt, and there's also the negative button here, and you can start subtracting areas. If you want to add areas, drag, and that will start shifting it. But my selection's pretty good at the moment. There's a few other options in here. There is a paintbrush, which allows us to manually paint in areas that you want to show, or once again, Alt to hide. In here is also the object selection tool, which is exactly the same as the one that I used outside of this program, out of the mask mode. And lasso tool, poly or straight a standard lasso, which again, if we hold or just leave it as default, it will add, and if we hit Alt, it will subtract. So very handy for doing hard edge stuff like shirts and stuff like that. Really good. Hand tool, spacebar will do that for you, and zoom tool, great, or control plus, control minus. This tool here I've left for last. This is the refine edge tool. This is super handy. Alright, before we start playing around with this, please have a look at the properties panel over here, and specifically the view mode. And if we drop down the view mode, we have got a bunch of options in here. Onion skinning, marching ants, which I don't really use much, overlay, which is super effective on black, on white, and then finally black and white, which is immensely important. So it's a matter of sort of selecting through this, and what you can see is we can actually change the transparency on some of these. And if I drop the transparency down to 0, we will fully see our background. And in this case, it's not much there, but trust me, if there's all sorts of assets going on, you want to be able to define. So you can slide this through and sort of find out where your mask is and where it isn't. Now, I've put in a red background, sorry, so you can see that as the background as well. But if you switch to overlay, you can actually choose what color you're going to have affecting the background of this. So if you've got a red object, you really don't want a red background, so I've changed mine to green, and again you can start dropping the opacity. And remember, I've got a red background in my actual layers, so that's why that's showing up. Anyway, so this one works pretty well. I can see these little white assets popping out through the hair, and I want to clean those up. So this is where our edge refine tool comes in. So here's our edge refine tool. Do have a look at the brush size here. I'm going to lower the hardness of that because I actually want a kind of a soft brush for this. And of course you can adjust your brush size or use the square brackets for that. And then I'm just going to brush it lightly around the edge of the hair here. Now I don't want to get too aggressive with it, because what that will actually do is it'll start destroying areas that I don't really want to destroy. Big caution with this is try to be really careful around like hard areas like the skin there, and I can instantly see that I've made a mistake there in doing that, which I'm going to try and fix up. And obviously if I run over the shirt, it's going to take chunks out of that, so I'm going to undo that. If you really do mess something up like that, my big suggestion for that is either use the paintbrush or the lasso tool and just repaint in some areas for that, and then go back and try and repair them once again. So it could be through using the quick selection tool. I'm going to hit Alt and I'm going to try and dig that through and see how that goes. Or in this case, you know, I may need to switch to the poly lasso tool and just try and add in the areas. Usually I'd change the opacity of this so I can see what's going on underneath, but I'm just going to eyeball it for now. Alright, so do toggle through your view modes. See what works for you to make sure that you're not destroying areas that you don't want. Then finally go to on black and white, and this one's a really important one because it's going to allow us to sort of see, I'm going to zoom in for this, areas that possibly shouldn't be transparent. So this area over here, anything black or grey is going to be partially transparent, anything white is going to be completely visible. So I can actually see there's parts of the ear here that are going to be slightly transparent, and while we might not notice them straight away, if we've got a weird background it will. So I'm going to grab the brush tool and I'm just going to paint in white with this. Don't forget you can also change the hardness of your brush tool if you want a bit more of a softer brush for that. Alright, jump through. I'm doing this as a demo, so I'm going to really try and speed through this a bit, but zoom in for little assets. So depending on your client, this could be all crucial. There are some other options in the properties panel: smooth, feather, contrast, shift, edge. You can play around with those, but most of the time I find that this is usually pretty good. And once again, once I've done, I'm going to hit OK, and this is going to transfer me back to my regular mode. Now there's a few little tricks and tips for this if you really want to get into refinement. One is using the dodge and burn tool, O and shift O to go cycle between those. Sponge tool is not going to do much because that's a saturate or desaturate, and masks work in grayscale, so there's no need for that. Burn tool is going to darken. So in mask speak, anything that is darker is going to be more invisible. So if there's areas that for some reason are showing up that you need to make more invisible, this is a good opportunity, and you can select something like shadows or midtones, and you can actually start darkening those up, and that will actually start making some areas more invisible. The opposite to that is the dodge tool, which is going to lighten areas and thereby making them more opaque or more visible. And if you run through that, I'm going to set this to highlights because usually it's areas that are pretty close, but I want to make them more visible. So that's usually the setup for that. Also, once you're in your main work area, you can also do things like select a brush tool and use white to add, or X just to switch over to black here, or black to subtract. So we've still got those options in mask mode, and once again you can always re-enter that mask refining area. Final things to sort of think of is we will sometimes get a little bit of light bleed in this, and specifically if I have a look at this image, I'm going to change the color of my background. I'm just going to go G for paint bucket again. I'm just going to drop in black for this instance, and what I'll actually see now is around the hair we've got this white glow, and this could be green or blue if you're using green or blue screen, or it could be red if you've got a red environment light. Now there's a nice little trick for getting rid of this using clipping masks. So I'm going to go back to my layer. Now that I can see those little white tinges, I'm going to go and create a new layer above. There it is there. It's just a blank layer. I'm going to go B for brush. I'm going to make sure I select a nice soft round brush here. So it's just, we want a little bit of subtlety to this, and I'm going to get a reasonable size for that. I'm going to press the Alt key. Alt key will bring up your color picker like so, and I'm going to go around. I'm going to find a nice neutral color for the hair, and I'm going to start just slightly just brushing that in. So I'm using a big brush, but I'm only using the tip of it, as I'm going to try and blend that in. If need be, lower the opacity of your brush so it gets even more subtle, and I'm really just trying to add a little bit of color to those areas that got that white bleeding through. If you need to change the color as you move around, do so. Increase or decrease the size of your brush and just blend that in subtly. Now at the moment it really doesn't look amazing. It's, you know, it's all over the place. It literally looks like someone spray painted over the top of a photo, and really not that effective. So what we're going to do now is convert this layer to a clipping mask. So very simply, I'm just going to right click in the layer panel and go to create clipping mask. I've maximized my screen so it's down the bottom. I'm going to scroll down a little bit, but create clipping mask, and that is going to allow that layer, use this arrow points down, to attach itself to the visibility of the layer below. So essentially anything invisible in that layer, that's what we're going to see in that clipping mask. So if I turn off that black layer there, we can see, awesome. If you need to release that, you can right click on the layer, not the thumbnail, and go scroll down, release clipping mask. So there it is there. Once again, right click, create clipping mask. Now I'm just going to run through some blend modes. Here are our blend modes at the top here. Normal is the default, and scroll through and try and take notes of which ones work and which ones don't. Darken's interesting, multiply's a bit aggressive, but I'm going to quickly zip through some of these. Overlay will sometimes work. I should turn that background back on so we can actually get a good contrast. Let's have a look. Darken's interesting, and it's really going to depend on the color of your background and the light bleed and all sorts of stuff for this. But let's see if we can find something. I actually think overlay's not bad. Multiply is usually a good one, but it's a bit aggressive, and so I'm just going to lower the opacity of that, and that's a radical improvement right there. Obviously, there's other improvements you could do along the way, adjusting levels and doing multiple clipping masks, but I'm just going to leave it as that. Finally, I'm going to try and package this up, and I can see a few glaring errors in there, but for whatever reasons, I'm just going to say let's set this up ready to rock and roll for exporting and using in a document. I can just see a really big issue with the bit there. All right, perfection. Stay away from it. All right, so I'm going to grab this layer and the clipping masks. They are two together. The layer, the image still has its mask on it, and the clipping mask is still attached. I'm not interested in the background layer. I'm going to actually delete it, and my emergency backup, I'm going to delete that. So I'm just going to get it down to our two basic layers. Shift select both of these, right click, and convert to smart object. There he is there. And rename it something like ID photo, something nice and easy. Now, as a smart object, what this means is now we can drag this into another document. We can scale up and down. It will not lose its resolution from when it was first created. And also, if we ever do need to edit this further, we can double click in the thumbnail for that, and we have access to our layers, our masks, and all that. So we literally are not destroying this layer at all. I'm going to turn that one off. Let's just make sure I am not turning off the right one. Yep, that's fine, so I can turn that one off. It's going to ask me to save, but I don't need to, and there it is there. Save that out, Control S. I really do recommend, if you've got access to it, do save it to Creative Cloud, but in this case I'm just going to save mine to the computer.